So again, welcome everyone. I can see people joining in, so we'll just give everyone another minute to join us, and then we will get started at the top of the hour. Okay, good. So it looks like we have people still joining, but as we are on our time, I'd just like to welcome everyone to the latest Redshift Espresso demo. Stop exact domain impersonation and lockdown domains with DMARC enforcement. I'm Rachel Gray, Marketing Director at Redshift, and I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today and taking the time to join us in our webinar. We will be running through a presentation and a short demo. If you have any questions, we hope that we can leave the questions until the end, and we'll be very glad to take questions from the end. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we will answer them at the end of the session, as I say. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Jorge Montiel, and let's get started. Thank you, Jorge.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, welcome everyone. And we're here to learn and to talk about how we can stop exact domain impersonation when it comes to emails, outbound emails, and so that we can, lock down those domains with DMARC enforcement. So I'm Jorge Montiel. I'm the head of sales engineering at Redshift for EMEA. So just to set the scene, we have here the agenda. You've seen this in your invite, but effectively the first part of the demo is going to be around how we can easily identify those sources, those email sending sources, and their threats, so that you can get into a policy of E equals reject as soon as possible. We'll also understand some added value when it comes to forensic email reports that will help you in those trickier situations, identifying whether any sending sources are yours or not. We'll see how we can manage SPF, DMARC, DKIM, and MTA-STS records directly from the UI rather than going into your DNS provider and doing it in a text mode. And then finally, but not least, we're going to talk about how we can overcome the 10 SPF lookup limit that probably some of you already know exists, about authorizing your genuine emails so that they can get delivered accordingly. So why is DMARC in place? Well, basically because SPF and DKIM, they've been around for some time. Basically, they're not enough. DKIM will sign your emails. SPF will authorize those IP addresses senders, especially those third-party ones. But effectively, the fact that they too may pass doesn't mean that the email comes from the intended domain. You could have a very valid DKIM record, a very valid SPF record, but still try to trick people into thinking that they're being sent by another organization. And that's how DMARC comes into place. It will look at the authentication identifiers from both of them. Not both of them will need to pass, but at least one of them, so that we can look at the alignment of those domains. What does that alignment means? It really what means is, does the domain in the DKIM, does the domain in SPF, and everywhere else in the envelope or the headers of that message all align effectively, meaning that are all the same? And if that's the case, then DMARC passes, and then we can have a truly authenticated email being delivered. Now, we've talked about the SPF lookups. It's sometimes a headache for a lot of people. Just to set the scene, SPF understands, just like any internet-based communication, only understands IP addresses. However, managing IP addresses is difficult. Hence, we can now have, well, we've always been able to have what it's called includes, which is basically name-based DNS records that we can have in our SPF record, but it's limited to 10 lookups. So if we go over that 10 lookup limit, then there is a risk that some emails will not get delivered. Now let's crack on with the demo itself. Hopefully it's not going to be you in that picture. So if you just gonna swap my screens over here. All right, so you should be looking at my dashboard over here, my console. So effectively, what are we looking at here? So we're looking at, this is where I manage my domains. Right now, I'm only showing one. So we would have, if you have more than one, and subdomains as well, we would have that list over here. This is the status reporting when it comes to on DMARC, which is the name of our solution. And then if it's the status of the policy, in this case, this would be on reject, the status of SPF, if it's not over that limit that we've been talking about, BIMI, brand indicator for messaging identification. I don't know a brand on this domain, so I can't have it. And MTA-STS, whether it's configured or not. In this case, in this example, is not. Are we using dynamic services? We'll talk about what that means in a moment. Do we have anything to configure to classify subdomains? We also identify if you have subdomains being reported in the DMARC reports, any actions to take, and then direct access to view the reports. Now, at this stage, probably this is where everybody would like to be, right? So we're talking about how we can stop impersonation. Well, this would be a very well executed scenario in which we have a domain, it's in reject, anything that is not authenticated then will be rejected. You may be asking yourself, well, but that's probably not as simple as that. In order to get into reject, then we need to talk about how we can classify the information, how we can know if one source is actually ours or not. You may be in the case in your organizations that you don't have 100% control as IT or any other department, how other departments like sales, marketing, legal may be using third-party solutions to send emails because of their normal operations. So in order to get control over that, then you need a tool that will report back as to all of those emails that are using your domain. So if we want to see those, domains, then it's as easy as I click on View Reports. So click on that. It takes me to reports. I'm going to change to the demo environment. It takes me to the reports. And what are we seeing over here? So we have the domains that we want to select, the period in which I want to see the reports, the type of senders. Then we have a very nice graphical overview of everything that, typical traffic light scenario in which, green is passed, red is failed or rejected, and then quarantine as an amber. All across that set period of time, then we can get a breakdown of all of the receivers. So those that have received our emails, and location. So sometimes it's important to understand the geolocation of the email senders that are sending emails on using my domain. If it doesn't make sense that, for example, in my case, that emails are being sent from Asia, then I need to have a look at that. I need to have a look at as to why we have that in place. And then we have another tab of delivery, in which it tells me, depending on the email sources, what kind of delivery I've had. ARC, it's probably a conversation for another demo, but effectively it's a protocol to guarantee that even when emails are forwarded, the authentication is preserved. Now, when we look at the actual reports, the details, then a very easy way to identify if emails are being sent, who are my actual, or which are my actual email sources, then basically email volume. So if I sort this list, so as you can see, we have a type, the source, the name of the source, and if we don't know the name, we put the IP address, the volume of emails. Now, reputation is actually added value that we have as an organization, that we provide with IP-based reputational information, either spam, block lists, or even if they've been suspected to be sending phishing emails. Then we have the percentage of DMARC compliance, the amount of DMARC fails, the passes on SPF and DKIM, and whether we have forensic reports or not. So if I want to start the exercise of identifying them, is, if email volume is the metric that I want to use for that, then I can say, okay, this looks very likely to be us, and actually I recognize the name. By the way, these names don't come from DMARC. These names come from on DMARC, so from the Redshift platform. So basically, we analyze those XML files that come into the emails from a DMARC report perspective, and then we do the lookup to put a friendly name to it. So right now I've identified that, and it's as easy as marking the one that I want to mark. And conversely, if I want to mark it as a threat because I don't recognize it, then I mark it as a threat. Or if I do recognize it, then I just mark it as asset. So the moment I mark it as an asset, then it changes from gray, black to green, just to let me know that it's an asset. Now, if we go back here then and say, okay, MailChimp, I'm actually not sure if MailChimp is mine. So volume is not enough. I don't quite understand that it's being used in the organization. Some of them are passing, as you can see. So I'd like to understand if this is really me. So from that perspective, in this case, we do have access to forensic reports. Just as a note as well, forensic reports is an optional. So the receiver, the ones that are sending you DMARC reports, have the option to implement forensic information. We'll see what that looks like in a moment. However, not all of them will do it because, first of all, it's optional as part of it. But the reason why it's optional is because they need to be redacted properly to protect the privacy of those emails in terms of the forensic information. So because of that, we have access to a very unique feed of emails that get redacted before they are sent to us, and then we redact them again. We do a second pass of redaction to make sure that we don't reveal any sensitive information. And from that perspective, with on DMARC, you will get the value of having extra forensic reports that you wouldn't get otherwise. So again, if I want to see those forensic reports for MailChimp, it's as easy as just clicking on View. And as you can see, the source ID is MailChimp. And then I start to look at the emails. And then I see, okay, these emails actually look very familiar. It looks like, yes, these are emails that we would usually send. Now, this is all demo data, is not real data. But let's imagine that obviously I do recognize those usernames. I recognize the subjects. It looks like it's all coming from where those emails should be, et cetera, et cetera. Or I can just say, well, actually, I'm not 100% sure. I still want to see more details. So I'm going to pick one example or two. So I just click on it, and then I'll get the further details. So we do get the front email address. We don't get the to, but we do get the servers. Then we get the details of the authentication. And from here, then I can make a decision as to whether it makes sense that these emails are mine or not. And if they are, then I go back, as we just seen it, I go back to mark it as an asset. Or if I detect that this is fraud, then I mark it as a fraudulent, as a threat. Now, the next step is we're going to look at how we can manage my SPF records and DKIM and DMARC records from the UI rather than on the DNS. How is that possible? And then lastly, after that, we're going to see how we overcome the 10 lookups. Obviously, all of these that we're looking at and these exercises, these steps that we're taking in real life, what it really means, I'm trying to identify everything, configure it properly. We have engineers that will help our customers along the way on that journey. We also have a lot of articles in our knowledge base to help self-service when you're doing that, so that you can configure everything correctly to get into reject. And part of it is managing your SPF records as well. So as you find a new source that wasn't already identified in your SPF record, then you can start adding them. But it's a lot easier doing it in a graphical interface than in your DNS. So from that perspective, we have more options here hidden in this left panel, and then we would simply go into dynamic services. So we click on that, right? And I'm going to check this, change it to this. And as you can see, we have a tab dedicated to SPF, another one for DMARC, then DKIM, and then MTA-STS. As you remember, that one is not configured yet, but it's as simple as after it does the DNS check, then generate the records, and then we follow the instructions. Now, we'll talk about SPF in a bit more details, but you can already spot that, you know, I have 11 lookups, so we'll understand that how that affects, if anything. But a good example to understand how, because it has a lot of configurations, if I wanted to configure all of these in a traditional way on my DNS, then basically all of this is just a continuous line separated by commas, et cetera, to tell the DNS what my policy is, what percentage of emails are going to be applied, then what's my subdomain policy. If it's none, then the subdomains will inherit the DMARC policy. If we want to have a different policy for the subdomains, then we change it here. These are the email addresses that will be set in the record so that the receivers can send us the XML reports. Again, you've already seen that those reports look nice in a graphical interface, even though they came as an XML. That's something that is done automatically and continuously by the platform. And then also more optional configuration. So if I wanted to change, let's say for whatever reason, I made a mistake, I need to go back into quarantine, then it's as simple as changing here to quarantine and save the changes. That will get propagated across the DNS, and probably 5-10 minutes, it will take effect. So I'm gonna leave it as is. This is a live environment. But how do we get to this point? Well, if I open this, then you'll see that there is a CNAME in which this is my DMARC subdomain, and then the value of that is actually being delegated to on DMARC in this case. So, and we call all of those smart records, because effectively, whomever there is going to verify our DMARC policy, then it will go into here, and then we will return all of these configuration in the normal way. So from a public perspective, the recipients that are trying to check your DMARC policy will not see any difference. Now, as we've been talking about, there is a limit, a 10 lookup limit of includes. Now, within, and I have 11, right? So let's start with that. So within the dashboard as well, it is possible under managed domain, this is where we started off, to see details. These details is the public information, is mainly the public information as to how my configuration is being seen or exists. So in that respect, as you could see, you know, the DMARC record looks, this is the text-based DMARC record, even though it's all managed and configured from here, from the UI. And as you can see, my SPF only has one include, which is the smart, what we call the smart record, and only has 3 lookups, right? Again, I'm going to go back here, dynamic services, and then you'll see that I have 11. So what that means is we can add here as many includes, and we'll add one just as an example. We can add here as many SPF includes with as many lookups as necessary, and it will all get flattened. So that concept of flattened basically means I go to the includes, I check those includes, and I update the SPF record with all of the IP addresses. So we return pages. That's why we have 3 lookups on mine. Between the two, I need those 3 lookups with only IP addresses. Now, another important part is managing the errors. By the way, this is the way that it includes the smart include looks like as well. Managing the errors is important because, you know, organizations make mistakes. When I say organization, I'm talking about these third parties may make mistakes and may include IP addresses that no longer exist and things like that. So automatically and continuously, we're going to check first if there are new IP addresses. All of these is done based on the time to live of these includes, and then we're going to see if there are any errors. And if there are any errors, automatically the system will be able to go back and apply the last known good configuration and reapply it. And if he can't solve a last known good configuration, then he will send an alert to your systems or to via email addresses, however it's configured, to tell you that there is an SPF record that needs looking at. Now, I can easily right now add a new, let's say I'm going to add Saba Cloud, right? And it's as simple as I click on Add New Include. Just copied it from somewhere else. I paste it here, add include, and I have 6 more. So that's 17 that I have right now. And if I go back to my domain, it probably hasn't changed from the 3. There we go. Right? So it's as simple as that. You can add as many. We've had customers with hundreds, I'm not exaggerated, with hundreds of lookups that manage everything within this tool. Now, that's it for the demo. I'm just going to finish off with the rest of the presentation. Just to give you, to leave you with a final thought around something that Gartner has started to study, which is what is called CTEM, or Continuous Threat Exposure Management. What that means is that it's important for organizations to understand what weakness an attacker sees in your environment. So you need to look at your environment, not just from an email perspective. Today we're talking about emails. This is a series of sessions, and you would have seen probably the previous ones. But effectively look at all of your exposure and see if there are any threats, and then gain information so that you can action those. So in the case of today's example, so you look at your email exposure through DMARC, and then on DMARC will give you the actions to fix it. Configure well your email senders so that you don't go over the SPF limits, or look at this, you need to now add this new email sender to your DKIM and to your SPF configurations, et cetera, et cetera. Trying to get all of that automated in terms of not just email, but inventory of your complete digital estate and get assessments for it. One part of that is you can enter just the way to get the best results is enter one domain or the ones that you know, and then you start as simple as that, getting results. And Gartner, I'm just going to quote this from Gartner because it's an important statistic, is that by 2026, organizations prioritizing their security investment based on a continuous exposure management program will be 3 times less likely to suffer from a breach. I can quote a very famous for a British bank CIO that said in a public forum that she didn't care much about the immediate threat. Of course, they need to fix them and they need to action them if they're there. But what they really care about, in other words, what they're really investing on is making sure that everything digitally is well configured based on all the known standards, your HTTPS standards, your DMARC standards, your SPF standards, or your DNS security standards, etc., so that everything is well configured. And then Gartner confirmed that, because then they're going to be 3 times less likely to suffer from a breach. Now, like I said, this is a series. Join us in the next version of this. We'll talk about other topics that the Redshift Resilience platform can offer you. And also, as well, we would like to offer free cyber risk assessments. Like I said, we can look at all of that attack surface or all of that exposure in your digital estate, and make an assessment and give you a free risk assessment. So now I'll hand it over to my colleague Rachel.
Great, thank you, Jorge, for walking us through that. That was really useful. Just a couple of questions have actually just come through as you're finishing up the presentation. So one of the questions, how long does it take to reach full DMARC reject?
That is, obviously, everybody wants to get there as soon as possible. And we've had cases in which customers have reached, the best case we had, it's around 4 to 6 weeks. That was a very urgent case of an organization that needed to get into reject. They were getting attacked very heavily, and during COVID, and of course digital. Everything was being done remotely, and hence digital. So they needed to get into reject as soon as possible. We've had customers that do it between 3 to 6 months. So the good news is that we will move as quickly or as slow as possible, depending on your needs. We always aim, and we always talk about weeks. We never talk about months, let alone years, to get into reject. We always get our customers in within that time frame that we agree upon, because you have the automated tools. You just had a snippet of what that means today. We have other tools that are also will help you understand and assess your environment. But also we have a dedicated team that will work through the implementation process, and then on a continuous basis as well, but especially through the implementation process, that they have the know-how, the expertise of those third parties and how to configure them. Those email, like, your typical CRM, transactional emails, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so it can depend on the complexity of the email setup or the sources you send from. Okay, great. I'm just looking at time. We've got time for another one or two. So one of the questions, if SPF fails, but DKIM does not, how does DMARC validate? That's
good, thank you. So effectively, DMARC on the framework and the description and the definition of the framework, they say that one of the two needs to pass. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to be okay if you only do one of the two. What that means is that they only need one of the two to align. So first of all, is there SPF and DKIM? Yes, that's the first question that DMARC will ask. Second question is, okay, do the domains align? Yes. Now, there is a very common causality, which is emails that get forwarded. I'm not talking about, manually clicking on a button and forwarding emails. I'm talking about, I don't know if anybody has done this, but effectively you put an auto forward on your email account, and then that happens at the server level. So because it happens on the server level, then the SPF authentication gets broken, because the recipient of that forwarding, let's say I go from my Redshift account to my Gmail account. The email was intended to be sent at my Redshift, but I auto forwarded that to Gmail. Gmail only sees Redshift. They don't see company XYZ that originally sent me the email. So in that moment, SPF will break, but DKIM shouldn't break. So we need to make sure that DKIM is always also very well configured so that you always have that resilience between the two, so that DMARCing can analyze the results.
Okay, great. Good. And I think we've got time for one quick one. So what question come in? What SPF has more than 15 lookups?
So if it has more than 10, then the very likely scenario is that it's going to fail from it's called permanent error, perm error. And basically what that means is that it can't, the recipient may or may not know what to do with it. I'm not suggesting that all of the emails will fail for SPF authentication, but you don't know which ones will fail. You have no idea of knowing. Obviously, if you have on DMARC implemented, you will know that they have failed. But if you're working with us already, then it's the best recommendation is to start using dynamic services to avoid that. But if you right now are in that situation, then it's very likely that a percentage, it can be half, it can be most of them, it can be 20. It depends on sometimes the email recipients. Some are a bit smarter, or you may be in luck and it finds the IP address in the first lookup and not the 10th. It's a random exercise. It's a random situation in which you haven't got, you wouldn't have any control of it.
Okay, so that's great. So I'm just looking at time. We are up to our half an hour. So I'd just like to sign off and just say thanks everybody for attending. You will get the recording sent to you post-event, which you can share. Feel free to share to any colleagues. If you need to speak to us, please email registration@redsif.io, or we have the free assessment on the end of the presentation slides, which we'll be sending out in the recording. So I'd just like to say to Jorge, thank you very much, and to everybody else for joining us this afternoon or this morning. And we look forward to seeing you at our next Espresso demo in a few weeks' time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.